Welcome to the Hud Grad Club. I'm Chris Webb, and I'm the Alumni Engagement Career Consultant with the University of Huddersfield's Careers Employability Service. And, full disclosure, I'm also a University of Huddersfield graduate. So I've generally got pretty positive things to say about both the institution and any of our graduates. But don't take my word for it. In this podcast, we'll be meeting different members of the University of Huddersfield's global alumni community, finding out what makes them tick, about their experiences during their time at the university and their career journeys since completing their studies. Join us as we explore the inspiring, innovative and diverse range of individuals that make up the Hud Grad Club. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hud Grad Club, our podcast celebrating the University of Huddersfield alumni community. And Sam, very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much for having me, Chris. Great to see you again, and obviously a pleasure to be asked to come and do the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. As a bit of a starting point, if we've got anybody watching or listening to the podcast who maybe hasn't come across you before, can you just tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you studied at the university and what you're up to now?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Sam. I graduated from the University of Huddersfield back in 2015 after studying business management. I currently work for Lloyds Banking Group, and there I provide executive support to one of our risk directors.
Fantastic, very succinct intro. We're going to, I know, dive into that in a little bit more detail, kind of moving through the podcast. But we start every episode, as always, with our greatest Hud story section. So this is all about kind of finding out your sort of memories, your experiences from your time at the university. So do you have any kind of particular Hud stories you'd like to share with us on the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of best memories, stories, that sort of stuff, as you might expect, there's probably a fair few that it wouldn't be appropriate for me to share in this medium. I do have some great memories from the uni, though. You know, the typical ones: Freshers Week, meeting new people, going out, socialising, all that sort of stuff. I'd say one that really stands out to me, though, is actually from my placement year that I did whilst I was at the university. You know, the camaraderie, building the relationships with those fellow placement students. And one particular story where we were tasked to organise the Christmas party for our team. So quite a large group of people, 100 or so, quite a large budget. And, you know, for 3 or 4 still teenagers at that point, trying to arrange something like that was very interesting. You know, that trying to get the venue or making sure the drinks orders and everything were okay. And there was something in particular around, you know, due to reputational type risks, we couldn't say who we were booking the party for. So yeah, there was lots of hoops to jump through. And, you know, as you might expect, seeing certain people outside of work in certain situations was, quite eye-opening compared to what you might see in the office. But yeah, lots of great memories from placement year, you know, working late, trying to impress, ordering the pizzas in, and built some great relationships with those people, 2 of which are actually going to be 2 of the groomsmen at my wedding next year. Wow. So I guess that speaks for itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing how many kind of current students and graduates reflect on the placement year as being such a kind of key focal point of the degree, or such a key kind of turning point sometimes in their career development, and particularly the event planning side of things. I mean, I could certainly speak from my experience as well as saying, yeah, once you've been involved in something like event planning, you really do appreciate how much goes into that. It's such a learning experience, isn't it?
Indeed.
Fantastic. So yeah, great memory to share there. And I mean, it links very nicely, I guess, into sort of the next section of the podcast, where we talk a little bit about your kind of career journey and that transition, I guess, from student to graduate. So you undertook the placement year, as you mentioned. You then went and finished sort of the final year of the degree. And what was that transition like afterwards? So finishing the degree and kind of moving into sort of the world of work, how did that all kind of go about, and how did that feel at the time, I guess?
Yeah, so I mean, genuinely, the transition from being a student at university, then, you know, into the world of work, I didn't find it all that difficult. I'd kind of worked in some capacity since I was 14, 15. So I was used to dragging myself out of bed early in the morning, putting in long hours, that sort of stuff. But I do think that experience that I referenced on my placement year that really did make a huge difference. So when I, thankfully did quite well on that placement year and returned to Lloyds as a graduate, I wasn't starting from scratch. I wasn't starting from zero. I was already quite familiar with the systems, processes that they use at Lloyds. Generally felt quite comfortable, orientating myself even around the building. With, I would bump into people that I knew from my placement year, and in the first couple of weeks and months especially, that helped me to feel a lot more comfortable than I would have done if I was just, walking in off the street, so to speak.
And how did the sort of placement, I guess, impact on, I suppose, the start of that kind of career journey with Lloyds? Did that sort of give you an idea of what you were wanting to do with the organisation once you graduated? Has it sort of had that kind of impact as well?
Yeah, so I did my placement year working in risk management, and naturally, if you do well in that placement year, you are often offered a place on the graduate scheme. The thing about the placement year was it was one job for the whole year, whereas the graduate scheme, you typically rotate around usually 4 jobs in a 2-year period. But the role I did on that placement year was in project management, and the nature of that sort of role, you speaking to lots of different people, different stakeholders in lots of teams, finding out about them, what they do, what their teams do. So although I only did one specific role in that placement year, when I went back as a graduate, in terms of orientating myself in the division and in the organisation, I felt I had a pretty good understanding of that. And then transitioning on to the graduate scheme, people often say your jobs, your first couple of jobs in your early career, it's just as much about finding out what you don't want to do as it is about what you do want to do. And I quickly, understood that I really wanted to play to my strengths. My strengths are, developing relationships with people, stakeholder management, project management and delivery, and less so the more technical side. So, complicated work in Excel, coding, that sort of stuff. So I did a combination of those types of roles on the graduate scheme. And yeah, afterwards I was very clear in what I wanted to do.
And what does that sort of look like for you now in the job that you're doing? Because I think, people often have, I guess, misconceptions of financial organizations and what jobs in finance look like. So as you said, doing something that's maybe got a bit more of an orientation towards kind of project stakeholder management, but within a financial organization, how does that kind of look within the work that you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, so my current role and my previous role have both been providing executive support to a couple of our risk directors, and it is quite hard to articulate that to someone who isn't inside the organization, even trying to explain it in the past to friends, family, or people who work elsewhere in the group. But I'll certainly give it a good go. But if you imagine a senior executive in the organization, they're exceptionally busy. I've got a lot of work going on, and by nature, the majority of it is urgent, and the majority of it needs doing very quickly, and it's very important. So typical examples might be the director has meetings with the regulators who oversee the bank. They might have meetings with the board or the CEO. They might be on certain projects that are under non-disclosure agreements about mergers or acquisitions or new products that the group wants to launch. So a lot of it is making sure that that director is working optimally and as efficiently as they possibly can to do their job. In practice, that is a lot of speaking to people, networking, building relationships with stakeholders to get information from other people and other teams to make sure that those directors are adequately prepared. I'll often be tasked with special projects. So, a particular confidential piece of work that might need doing aside and away from the team. Again, so as I referenced before, project management is something that I really enjoy and I'm really passionate about, and people as well. And in short, my day is speaking to people from 7:30 in the morning till 6 in the evening And if I didn't enjoy that, the days could be quite long. But thankfully, I do genuinely enjoy that. That's the best part of my job by far.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good description. You're right. Some jobs are very difficult to kind of, articulate without the context there to kind of support it. But I guess, from what you're saying, you're essentially kind of taking problems off other people to free them up to handle things that need to be done at their level. And at the same time, I guess, as you said, sort of managing those relationships that are key within the organization. So, yeah, it sounds like a really interesting role. And I mean, in terms of, I guess, how you feel sort of your career's progressed so far, because as you said, 2015 graduate, so you had a few years before COVID, which I guess you're probably quite grateful for before big changes kicked in. How have things sort of gone so far? How has it sort of felt, I guess, from that period in 2015 and then kind of moving through COVID?
Yeah, so I mean, since I joined the group in 2015, had 2 years initially on the graduate scheme, did 4 roles in that 2-year period, rotating across various different parts of the risk division. Spent time in credit risk, so commercial and retail credit risk. Spent time in what we called non-financial risk, so conduct and compliance, that sort of stuff, and time in project management, delivering kind of regulatory type projects as well. Since the graduate scheme, I've held, off the top of my head, 5 managerial roles, I think. A couple where I've had my own line management responsibilities. At the moment, I manage a small team of 3 people. I've mentored and coached other people in their early careers, be that people on placement, apprentices, graduates. So it's nice to complete that full circle. And yeah, obviously I'm ambitious. I want to get on, and I would hope in the next 12 months or so there may be a promotion on the cards.
Well, if your managers are listening to this,
yes, I will be sending them a link.
Fantastic. And I mean, I know you mentioned about kind of giving back, and I know that that's something that you kind of care quite passionately about in terms of the university as well. So tell us a little bit about some of the stuff that you do with the business school, because I know you're quite heavily involved in sort of supporting them since being a graduate.
Yeah, so I've returned to the university. I mean, I've lost count countless times. Some typical stuff, placement fairs, graduate job fairs. I've come in and talked about, Lloyds Banking Group as an employer and the opportunities that we offer. I've been involved in supporting a couple of the modules within the business school. So designing work-based projects, real-life problems that we have as a banking group, and then giving case studies to students for them to try and solve. So that's been really. And quite recently, I've got involved in an alumni mentorship program. So I'm mentoring a current student at the university who's kind of coming to the end of their journey, and they're trying to decide what they want to do next. And that's something that I've really enjoyed and found really rewarding.
And I mean, why do you think that sort of thing, I guess, is kind of particularly important? Because we talk a lot about, certainly from like an alumni perspective, the benefits of kind of alumni, engaging with the university. But of course, that's often from a university perspective. But I guess from your point of view, what do you feel the sort of value is that keeps bringing you back? And I suppose the value to the students that you're helping as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I first came to an open day at the university and, applicant visitor days and things after that. I remember there were current students and alumni there at the time, and they were talking about their journeys, how they'd been successful in their career, how the university had supported them to do that. And that left a really strong initial impression with me. And even at the time, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be brilliant if in 3-5 years' time, I could come back and do something similar? Lo and behold, I did end up doing that. So yeah, I find that a really compelling proposition for students coming into the university. There's a bit of selfishness in it for me. It helps with my own personal development, coaching, that sort of stuff. If I can test and trial ideas outside of work and then implement them and bring them into work, that's also good as well. And like I've alluded to a couple of times, I am genuinely a people person. So getting involved in pieces of work and projects where I meet and interact with new people, that's something that I feel passionate about and that I enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as you said, there's a relatability there as well, isn't there? People with lived experience that have been through that process of being a student, going through the transition to becoming a graduate. It's very difficult to replicate, isn't it, if you haven't been through it? So
yeah, as a student, you know, you sit there and you learn from and respect the academics in the business school. Clearly, they're there for a reason. I do think having somebody who is perhaps, you know, between 3 and 5 years ahead of you, was in your shoes not so long ago, coming and talking about their personal lived experiences, can just help elevate that a little bit. It makes it feel a bit more real.
Absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned there obviously about the importance of people. You know, it's a theme that's kind of recurred on the podcast, and you mentioned obviously, you know, a thing that you really get out of work, that kind of interacting and kind of engaging with people. From your kind of perspective, who have been maybe some of the important sort of figures in your career so far? You mentioned obviously being able to do that from your own perspective now for current students, but who's kind of been that person or those people, I guess, in your career so far?
Yeah, so I think whilst I was at university, there was one individual in particular who worked in the business school's placement unit at the time. He doesn't work there anymore, but I remember him coming and talking to us as students, and him effectively saying, if you are willing to put in the time and the effort and you want to do a placement year, him and his team will personally ensure that is something that you can achieve. And I knew right off the bat that a placement year was something that I wanted to do. Ultimately, all the 100 people in my lecture hall were all going to have a degree, which is great, but I wanted something that would differentiate me from that. And I spent countless hours with this individual, reviewing CVs, doing mock interviews, looking at application forms. And yeah, without that individual to encourage me, perhaps when I got a couple of initial rejections, you know, encourage you to keep going, be persistent. And yeah, I still speak to that person occasionally now, and I'm very thankful for them. In a work context, I'm working for Lloyds. I've been here for coming up to 8 years now. I've probably had a dozen line managers during that point. The majority have been good. A couple have been exceptional. And I would say the difference between a good line manager or a coach, which we would all hope to be, and someone who he's really exceptional is a huge difference. How you feel waking up in the morning, coming into work, you know, willing to, you know, to run through brick walls for that person, it makes a huge difference. And the particular person that I work for at the moment, really embodies that. Really inspiring person to work for. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm enjoying my role so much at the moment.
Yeah, it's such an important point about that. I guess that differentiating factor between, you know, how people make you feel. It's like that Maya Angelou quote, isn't it? People always remember how you made them feel. Those are the people you tend to connect with and remember and sort of think about. So it's great to hear that you've kind of had some of that sort of in work, but also obviously kind of during your time at the university. Really interesting to hear your kind of reflection so far on your career, Sam. I mean, we finish the podcast each time with our underrated careers advice section. So this is very much a kind of chance for you to share any sort of nuggets of wisdom you feel you may have acquired through your career so far, and share that with any sort of students or graduates who might be watching or listening to the podcast. So do you have any underrated career advice for us that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I briefly touched on it earlier, but one piece of advice that I try and give people in their early careers when I speak to them is to understand what your strengths are and then really double down on them. So early in my career, I heard a lot of people talking about, you know, improving your weaknesses so they could become your strengths, which I found a bit strange as a concept at the time, if I'm honest. There's clearly a need for people to be, you know, generally well-rounded individuals, but typically people get a job and excel in a job because of something that they're really, really good at. So to use myself as an example, I once went on a SAS course, which for those who don't know is a certain type of programming language. I'd been encouraged to do that as, you know, part of my development. I learned a fair bit on that course, but realistically afterwards, I'd probably gone from a 0 out of 10 to maybe a 3 or 4 out of 10, which in reality, that's not going to secure me a job. Since then, I've really tried to double down on what I see as my strengths. So communicating, bringing people together, project management and delivery, they're the sort of skills that I would look for in a job anyway, and I would excel once I was in that role. So yeah, there's all sorts of things that people may have as their strengths, but I would encourage people to really reflect on what they are and then double down on them.
It's a great point, and I think what's really nice is it's becoming much more common, both in terms of a recruitment approach from companies, but also I think in terms of the advice that's being given to individuals. Because you're absolutely right. I think, for years perhaps there has been this element in some parts of like a deficit model, that you almost need to bring everything up to a baseline. Whereas, as you say, for a lot of organizations, they have a problem to solve, and you want someone who's going to be really, really high up, as you say, 8 or 9 or higher, maybe, at being able to solve that problem. And perhaps not so worried about whether there are 3 or 4 other things that are unrelated to the role that you can or can't do. So I think that sort of strengths focus is fortunately becoming much more kind of prevalent in sort of general discourse in business and elsewhere. But yeah, it's good to hear that, I guess, kind of reiterate from your point of view, and I guess, from your experience and how it's benefited you, because it sounds like that's had a big impact in terms of where you've moved in your career, rather than focusing on other areas that maybe weren't so beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in your early career, it may take you a few years to fully understand what your strengths are, and it's always good to try and learn new skills and explore things. But when you become a bit more settled in your career, once you know what you're good at, you should just go for that.
And as you say, it doesn't limit development, in the sense that I think there's sometimes that confusion, isn't there, between strengths and skills, that, within your area of strength, there's still plenty of room for professional development. And there are new skills you can learn, but it's very much within that area, like you say, that you excel at.
Yeah, precisely.
Fantastic. Well, Sam, thanks so much for all of the kind of reflections so far. Really interesting to hear about your career journey since leaving the university. And obviously, we still see you regularly around, which is great. For any sort of students and graduates who've been watching or listening to the podcast who may want to kind of find out more about your work or connect with you afterwards, where's the best place to find you?
Yep, so I'm on LinkedIn. If you search my name, Sam Wood, I'm sure I will come up. Or if you wanted to contact me directly, my work email is sam.wood@lloydsbanking.com.
Fantastic. Well, what we will do is we will flash those up on the screen if you're watching the podcast, and if you're listening, we'll put those in the podcast notes in case you want to reach out to Sam following listening to or watching this episode. So, Sam, all that really remains to be said is a massive thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Thanks for becoming the latest member of the Hud Grad Club, and obviously we wish you well with everything moving forward.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Fab. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Enjoyed the podcast? Then go to the University of Huddersfield YouTube channel for all of our future episodes. Subscribe, like, and don't forget to hit the bell button for notifications. If you'd like to be involved in the Hud Grad Club podcast moving forward, please get in touch with us on alumni@hud.ac.uk.